I'm standing in what used to be TechFlow Solutions' state-of-the-art California data center, watching smoke curl from $20 million of melted servers while emergency crews spray foam across the charred wreckage. The acrid smell of burning silicon and plastic fills my lungs as I stare at the destruction that could have been prevented if my boss Marcus had just listened to me. 6 months of warnings, detailed reports, and desperate pleas fell on deaf ears because he thought I was overreacting. My phone buzzes with an incoming call from our biggest client, and my stomach drops as I answer to hear their lawyer's voice threatening to sue us for data loss affecting 3 million customers. My name is Wendy, and 3 years ago I thought I'd found my dream job at TechFlow Solutions in Sacramento. Fresh out of UC Davis, with a mechanical engineering degree and 2 years of cooling system experience at Boeing, I was hungry to prove myself in the tech world. Marcus Sterling hired me as a junior technician, but my attention to detail and willingness to work weekends quickly earned his respect. Within 18 months, he promoted me to Senior IT Infrastructure Specialist, putting me in charge of monitoring our crown jewel facility. The California data center wasn't just another server farm. This gleaming 40,000-square-foot facility housed critical infrastructure for major tech companies, medical record systems for 12 hospitals, and financial data for 3 regional banks. Every rack of servers represented millions of dollars in client trust, and I took that responsibility seriously. The cooling system alone was a marvel of engineering. 6 massive chillers working in harmony, backup generators capable of powering a small town, and enough redundancy to survive almost any disaster. At least that's what we told our clients. Marcus built TechFlow from nothing after his previous startup got acquired by Google. He was 42, brilliant, and possessed the kind of charismatic confidence that made investors write checks without hesitation. Sarah Chen, our CFO, shared his vision of taking the company public within 2 years. Together, they painted pictures of expansion into new markets and revolutionary cloud services that would make TechFlow the next Amazon Web Services. The facility was managed by Jake Morrison, Marcus's college roommate from Stanford, who'd followed him through 3 different companies. Jake had an MBA, but limited technical knowledge, relying heavily on outside contractors for actual maintenance work. He was the kind of guy who could charm clients during facility tours, but couldn't tell you the difference between a chiller and a generator if his life depended on it. Patricia Williams was our lead security officer, a former Air Force veteran who'd spent 15 years protecting military installations before joining TechFlow. She was methodical, thorough, and one of the few people who understood that our clients weren't just buying storage space, they were buying trust. 6 months ago, during a routine inspection of the cooling system's performance metrics, I noticed something odd in the temperature logs. The primary chiller units were cycling more frequently than normal, and coolant levels were dropping faster than manufacturer specifications suggested they should. It wasn't dramatic, maybe a 2% increase in usage over 3 months, but in my experience, small anomalies often indicated bigger problems brewing beneath the surface. I spent the next week diving deeper into the data, cross-referencing maintenance schedules with performance metrics. The backup chillers were kicking in during periods when they should have remained dormant, and I detected subtle vibrations in the primary cooling towers that weren't present 6 months earlier. Most concerning was the discovery that our environmental monitoring sensors were occasionally recording temperature spikes that lasted only minutes before returning to normal ranges. My initial report to Marcus was comprehensive but diplomatic. I outlined my findings, recommended bringing in a specialist cooling system engineer for evaluation, and estimated the cost of preventive maintenance at around $200,000. Marcus read through everything carefully, asked thoughtful questions about my methodology, and promised to schedule the evaluation within 30 days. "Wendy, this is exactly the kind of proactive thinking that makes you valuable to this company," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I'd rather spend money preventing problems than explaining disasters to clients." For 2 weeks, I felt validated and appreciated. Marcus forwarded my report to Jake with instructions to coordinate the specialist inspection, and Sarah approved the preliminary budget for potential repairs. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then the first crack appeared in my confidence. During a scheduled system diagnostic, I discovered that the cooling system's main control unit was sending conflicting signals to our monitoring dashboard. The central display showed all systems operating within normal parameters, but individual sensor readings told a different story. Temperatures in server rack section C were running 4 degrees higher than the dashboard indicated, and coolant pressure readings varied by 12%, depending on which monitoring point I checked. I immediately called Marcus explaining that our primary monitoring system might be providing false data about critical safety metrics. He agreed to meet me at the facility that afternoon to see the problem firsthand. But when we arrived, everything appeared normal. The dashboard showed perfect temperatures, coolant levels were stable, and all diagnostic tests came back green. Marcus stood next to me watching the displays, and I could feel his patience wearing thin as I pointed at screens that showed no evidence of the problems I'd described. Maybe the system corrected itself, I suggested, knowing how weak that sounded. Or maybe you're seeing problems that aren't actually there, Marcus replied, his tone shifting from supportive to skeptical. You've been working a lot of overtime lately. When's the last time you took a vacation? That evening, I overheard Marcus on a phone call with Sarah as I was leaving the office. His door was slightly open and his voice carried into the hallway. I'm starting to worry that Wendy might be overthinking things, he said. She's brilliant, but sometimes brilliant people see complexity where none exists. The last thing we need right now is to spend hundreds of thousands chasing ghosts while we're preparing for the IPO. Standing in that hallway, listening to my boss question my judgment, I felt the first flutter of real fear in my stomach. Not fear of the cooling system failing, but fear that I was losing the trust and respect that had defined my career at TechFlow. The foundation of everything I'd built here was beginning to crack, and I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The doubt in Marcus's voice haunted me for weeks, but I couldn't ignore what my engineering training told me was happening. So I began conducting unauthorized inspections after hours, using my security keycard to access the facility when fewer people were around to question my methods. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The coolant pipes running beneath server section B showed clear signs of corrosion, with mineral deposits indicating slow leaks that had been ongoing for months. The backup generator batteries, which were supposed to be tested monthly according to company policy, had maintenance stickers showing their last inspection was 8 months ago. Most disturbing were the replacement parts I found in Jake's supply closet, cheaper off-brand components that didn't meet manufacturer specifications for our cooling system. I photographed everything, documented serial numbers, and cross-referenced part specifications with our original system design. The evidence was overwhelming. Someone was cutting corners on maintenance using substandard replacement parts and falsifying inspection records to cover their tracks. My relationship with Jake had always been cordial, but professional. He was Marcus's friend, not mine, and I'd learned to navigate his tendency to dismiss technical concerns he didn't understand. But this went beyond ignorance or incompetence. This was deliberate negligence that put our entire operation at risk. Jake, we need to talk about the cooling system maintenance records, I said, cornering him in his office Monday morning. What about them? He replied without looking up from his computer. The backup generators haven't been properly tested in 8 months, and someone's been using non-certified replacement parts in the chiller units. Now he looked at me, his expression shifting from annoyance to something that looked almost like panic. Those parts are fine, Wendy. They're from an approved vendor. Approved by whom? Because they're not on the manufacturer's compatibility list, and they're rated for 20% less pressure than our system requires. Jake stood up, closing his office door before responding. Look, we're trying to keep costs down while the company grows. Marcus wants us to be smart about spending and paying premium prices for parts that do the same job doesn't make business sense. They don't do the same job if they can't handle the pressure when we need them most. You're being paranoid, Wendy. Everything's been working fine for months. But I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He knew I was right, but admitting it would mean confessing to Marcus that his cost-cutting measures had compromised our most critical systems. My personal life was becoming increasingly strained by the situation at work. For the past 8 months, I'd been supporting my mother's medical expenses after her diabetes diagnosis required expensive insulin treatments that our family insurance only partially covered. The monthly payments were over $800, money I couldn't afford to lose if my job security became questionable. My younger brother Tommy had just started his sophomore year at UCLA, and I'd co-signed a student loan to help cover his tuition after our father's small construction business struggled following a workplace injury. Tommy was studying computer science with dreams of working in Silicon Valley, and I couldn't bear the thought of him dropping out because of financial problems. The pressure was affecting my relationship with David, a paramedic I'd met 6 months earlier at a community blood drive. He was kind, funny, and refreshingly honest after years of dating men who were more interested in tech industry networking than genuine connection. But my obsession with work problems was straining our time together. "You're always talking about cooling systems and temperature readings," he said over dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. "I know your job is important, but you're letting it consume your entire life." "This isn't about perfectionism, David. People's livelihoods depend on the systems I monitor. If something goes wrong, businesses fail, medical records disappear, and real people get hurt. But you're just one person. You can't save the world by yourself." His words stung because part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe I was taking on too much responsibility. Maybe Marcus was correct about me overthinking problems that weren't as serious as I believed. I scheduled a formal meeting with Marcus, preparing the most comprehensive presentation of my career. Charts showing temperature trends, photographs of corroded components, maintenance records, highlighting gaps and inconsistencies, and cost projections demonstrating that preventive action would cost far less than emergency repairs. Marcus agreed to give me 30 minutes on a Thursday afternoon, and I spent 3 days perfecting my presentation. This was my chance to make him understand the magnitude of what we were facing. I was 12 minutes into my explanation when his phone rang. "I'm sorry, Wendy, but this is the investor call I've been waiting for all week," he said, answering without hesitation. I sat in his office listening to him discuss market projections and growth opportunities while my carefully prepared evidence remained half presented on his conference table. 25 minutes later, he finished the call and looked at me as if he'd forgotten why I was there. "Right, the cooling system. Look, I appreciate your diligence, but we can't let infrastructure concerns slow down our momentum right now. The IPO process requires us to demonstrate consistent profitability, and unexpected maintenance expenses could hurt our valuation. Marcus, if the system fails, we won't have to worry about IPO valuations because we won't have a company." "You're catastrophizing, Wendy. These systems are designed with multiple redundancies. Even if something goes wrong, we have backup procedures. The backup procedures depend on components that haven't been properly maintained." He stood up, signaling that our meeting was over. "I trust Jake to handle facility operations. If there were real problems, he would have brought them to my attention." Walking back to my office, I felt a crushing sense of isolation. The technical evidence was irrefutable, but I was fighting against a culture that prioritized financial projections over engineering reality. Marcus trusted Jake because they were friends. Jake minimized problems because admitting them would expose his cost-cutting failures. And I was caught in the middle, watching disaster approach while everyone around me insisted on looking the other way. That night, I worked late trying to recalibrate backup monitoring systems, hoping to create independent verification of the temperature problems I'd been tracking. The facility was quiet, except for the hum of servers and the rhythmic cycling of cooling units working harder than they should need to. I was running diagnostics on the environmental sensors when I heard voices coming from the equipment room. Through a gap in the server racks, I watched Jake directing 2 contractors as they replaced temperature sensors throughout the facility. "Make sure these are calibrated exactly like I showed you," Jake was saying. "We need consistent readings across all monitoring points." "What about the old sensors?" one contractor asked. "Dispose of them. The new ones will eliminate the false alarms we've been getting." I crouched behind a server rack, recording video on my phone as they systematically replaced sensors with different models. When they finished, Jake pulled out a clipboard and made notes on what appeared to be an official maintenance log. After they left, I examined one of the discarded sensors. It was functioning perfectly calibrated to manufacturer specifications and designed to trigger alerts when temperatures exceeded safe ranges. The replacement sensors were cheaper models with different alert thresholds, essentially programmed to hide the very problems I'd been documenting. The next morning, I confronted Jake in his office, showing him the video I'd recorded. "You're deliberately hiding system failures," I said. "Those sensors were working correctly." Jake's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. "Marcus authorized those replacements to stop triggering false alarms that were causing unnecessary panic." "They weren't false alarms. The temperatures really are climbing. According to your paranoid interpretation of normal fluctuations, according to basic engineering principles that you'd understand if you had any technical training." Jake leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me explain something about how this company works, Wendy. Marcus built TechFlow to succeed, not to satisfy your perfectionist tendencies. We have investors, clients, and employees depending on our growth. Your doomsday scenarios could destroy everything we've worked to build. And ignoring real problems could destroy everything our clients have trusted us to protect. Maybe you should consider whether TechFlow is the right fit for your particular skills. The threat was subtle but clear. Keep pushing, and my job would disappear. All my concerns about my mother's medical bills, my brother's education, and my own financial future crystallized into a moment of terrible clarity. I was completely alone in this fight, and the people who should have been my allies were becoming my enemies. But as I walked back to my desk, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Those servers contained data belonging to millions of innocent people who trusted us to protect their information. I might be alone, but I wasn't wrong, and somehow I had to find a way to make that matter. California's weather services issued the first extreme heat warnings on a Monday morning in early August. Temperatures were forecast to reach 112 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 consecutive days, breaking records that had stood for over 30 years. The Pacific Gas and Electric Company immediately announced rolling brownouts to prevent grid overload, meaning our backup power systems might be tested in ways we'd never anticipated. I spent that entire week monitoring our facility around the clock, documenting every temperature spike and system fluctuation as external conditions pushed our compromised cooling infrastructure beyond its limits. The falsified sensors showed everything was normal, but my independent monitoring equipment painted a very different picture. Server Section A reached 89 degrees during peak afternoon hours, well above the 82-degree maximum recommended by manufacturer specifications. The primary chillers were running continuously instead of cycling normally, and coolant levels dropped 3 inches over 4 days as the system struggled to compensate for failing components and inadequate maintenance. But according to Jake's monitoring dashboard, everything was perfect. I was working 16-hour days, catching sleep in my car between shifts, surviving on coffee and determination, while watching our infrastructure slowly cook itself to death. My mother called twice, asking why I sounded exhausted, and I couldn't explain that I was trying to prevent a disaster that everyone else insisted couldn't happen. During this crisis, I discovered something that made my stomach turn. While researching our company's financial records for insurance purposes, I found emails between Marcus and Sarah discussing budget allocations that revealed a horrifying truth. The $200,000 that should have been spent on cooling system maintenance had been diverted to executive bonuses and IPO preparation costs. Marcus had personally received a $50,000 performance bonus the same week I submitted my initial repair recommendations. Sarah had used infrastructure funds to hire an expensive investment banking firm to manage our public offering. They weren't just ignoring maintenance needs, they were actively stealing money allocated for critical safety systems. More emails revealed the extent of their conspiracy. Marcus and Sarah had discussed my warnings in detail, acknowledging that my technical assessments were accurate, but agreeing that addressing them would compromise our timeline for going public. They'd calculated that the risk of system failure was acceptable compared to the potential profits from a successful IPO. Wendy's alarmist tendencies are becoming a real problem, Marcus wrote to Sarah. We need to manage her expectations until we can get through the offering process. After that, we'll have the capital to address any infrastructure issues. Sarah's response was even more chilling. Maybe it's time to consider whether she's really a team player. There are plenty of engineers who understand business priorities. They were planning to silence me one way or another. In desperation, I contacted our insurance company, directly bypassing normal corporate channels to speak with their risk assessment team. Robert Hayes, a senior investigator with 20 years of experience evaluating data center operations, agreed to review my documentation after I explained the potential scope of client data loss. What you're describing could affect thousands of businesses and millions of individual records, he said during our phone conversation. If your assessments are accurate, this represents one of the largest potential data security failures in California history. Hayes scheduled an inspection for the following Friday, giving me hope that independent experts would finally validate my concerns and force Marcus to take action. But when I arrived at work that morning, I discovered that Marcus and Jake had been busy preparing their own version of reality. Temporary portable cooling units had been brought in overnight, positioned strategically to supplement our failing systems during the inspection. The compromised sensors had been temporarily bypassed with functioning equipment that would provide accurate readings for exactly as long as Hayes was in the building. Most insidiously, they'd prepared falsified maintenance logs showing that all my recommended repairs had actually been completed months earlier. Jake had backdated records, forged my signature on inspection reports, and created a paper trail suggesting that our cooling infrastructure was not only functional but exemplary. When Hayes arrived, he saw a facility operating perfectly within all safety parameters. The portable cooling units maintained ideal temperatures. The temporary sensors showed no anomalies, and the falsified documents indicated a maintenance program that exceeded industry standards. "Your engineers' concerns appear to have been addressed comprehensively," Hayes told Marcus as they concluded the inspection. "Everything here meets or exceeds our policy requirements." Standing behind them as they toured the facility, watching Jake point out recent improvements that were actually temporary deceptions, I felt my last hope crumble. These people weren't just negligent or incompetent. They were criminals, deliberately falsifying safety records and defrauding insurance companies while putting millions of people's personal data at risk. The betrayal became personal that evening when David showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. "We need to talk," he said, his expression serious in a way I'd never seen before. "I know I've been distracted lately, but things at work are really complicated right now. That's what I need to talk to you about. Jake is my cousin." The words hit me like a physical blow. David, the man I'd been falling in love with, the person I'd confided in about my fears and frustrations, was related to one of the people actively sabotaging my efforts to protect TechFlow's clients. "You've been reporting our conversations to him," I said, the pieces falling into place. "I was trying to protect you, Wendy. Jake told me you were obsessing over minor technical issues that could destroy your career. He asked me to help you see reason." "Help me see reason, David. I'm trying to prevent a disaster that could hurt millions of people." "But you don't understand the business side. Sometimes you have to accept calculated risks to achieve bigger goals." "Calculated risks. Do you have any idea what happens when medical record servers fail? People die because doctors can't access patient information. Financial systems crash and destroy people's life savings. This isn't about business calculations. It's about basic human decency." David reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I thought you were different," he said. "I thought you'd be willing to compromise. I thought you were honest." He left that night, and I realized I was truly alone. Everyone I'd trusted, everyone I'd counted on for support, had chosen sides against me. My boss, my colleagues, and even my boyfriend were all part of a conspiracy to hide the truth about our failing infrastructure. But as I sat in my empty apartment that night, staring at temperature readings that showed our systems approaching critical failure, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to accept their bribes or transfer offers or threats. If they wanted to frame me for the disaster they'd created, they would have to do it while I was fighting back with everything I had. The next morning, Marcus called me into his office with an offer that confirmed everything I'd suspected about his true intentions. "Wendy, I've been thinking about your concerns regarding the California facility," he said, his tone friendly and reasonable. "I think you might benefit from a change of scenery. We're opening a new data center in North Carolina, and I'd like you to lead the infrastructure team there. 50% salary increase, full relocation assistance, and complete authority over all technical decisions." It was a golden parachute designed to get me 3,000 miles away from the disaster he was orchestrating. "What about the cooling system problems here?" Jake assures me that everything is under control. Sometimes bringing in fresh perspective helps solve persistent issues. "And if I decline the transfer?" Marcus's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "I'm sure you'll make the decision that's best for your family. Your mother's medical expenses must be a significant burden, and your brother's college costs aren't getting any cheaper." The threat was crystal clear. Take the bribe and disappear or lose everything. "I need time to consider your offer," I said. "Of course, but I'll need an answer by Monday. We can't hold the position indefinitely." Walking back to my office, I knew that Monday would never come. Not for Marcus, anyway. Because I'd just realized that he'd made one crucial mistake in his elaborate scheme to hide TechFlow's infrastructure failures. He'd underestimated me. That weekend, I sat in my apartment wrestling with the most difficult decision of my life. Marcus's transfer offer represented financial security for my family, an escape from a situation that was destroying my mental health, and a chance to start fresh, somewhere far from the corruption-consuming TechFlow. My mother's medical bills were approaching $3,000 monthly, as her diabetes treatment required increasingly expensive medications. The insurance company had denied coverage for a continuous glucose monitor that could prevent dangerous blood sugar fluctuations, leaving me to pay out of pocket for equipment that might save her life. Tommy called Saturday evening to tell me he'd made the dean's list and been accepted into an advanced computer science research program that would position him perfectly for the Silicon Valley career he'd dreamed about since high school. But the program required summer courses that would cost an additional $5,000 money our family didn't have without my continued employment. "I'm so proud of you, Tommy," I said, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. "Are you okay, Wendy? You sound weird." "Just tired from work. This job is more demanding than I expected." "But you love what you do, right? All those years of studying engineering, this is what you always wanted." His innocent faith in my career choices made my chest tighten. How could I explain that loving engineering meant fighting against people who valued profit more than human safety? How could I tell him that doing the right thing might cost him his education? Sunday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Wendy, this is Patricia Williams. I know you're not scheduled to work today, but I need to speak with you privately. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on J Street in an hour?" Patricia had always been professional, but distant, focused on security protocols rather than facility operations. I couldn't imagine why she wanted to meet outside the office. She was waiting in a corner booth when I arrived, looking around nervously, before gesturing for me to sit across from her. "I've been watching what's happening with the cooling system situation," she said without preamble. "And I've been conducting my own investigation into some irregularities I've noticed." "What kind of irregularities?" Patricia pulled out a tablet showing me photographs of documents I'd never seen before. "Marcus has been submitting false safety reports to federal regulators for the past 8 months. The Department of Energy requires quarterly assessments of critical infrastructure, and every report Marcus filed claimed our facility exceeded all safety standards." She scrolled to another image showing financial records. "He's also been billing insurance companies for maintenance work that was never performed. Look at these invoices. $300,000 for cooling system upgrades that Jake canceled after receiving payment." "How did you access these records?" "Security clearance has its advantages. But more importantly, I've been documenting safety violations as part of my job, and I realized that none of my reports were reaching the federal agencies they're supposed to go to." Patricia's revelations painted a picture of corruption far beyond what I'd suspected. Marcus wasn't just cutting corners on maintenance, he was actively defrauding government agencies and insurance companies while falsifying safety records that could affect national infrastructure security. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're the only person in this company who's been telling the truth about our technical problems, and because what Marcus is doing could land all of us in federal prison if someone doesn't stop him." She explained that TechFlow held contracts with several government agencies storing classified research data and backup systems for military installations. If our facility failed catastrophically, the security implications could affect national defense operations. "We need to coordinate our efforts," Patricia said. "I have evidence of financial fraud and false federal reporting. You have technical documentation of the infrastructure failures. Together, we might be able to expose this before people get hurt." For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. That afternoon, while Patricia contacted federal investigators through her military connections, I focused on the technical disaster that was accelerating beyond anyone's control. The heat wave was intensifying, with Monday's forecast calling for 115 degrees, the highest temperature ever recorded in Sacramento. Our compromised cooling system was already struggling at 112 degrees. An additional 3 degrees of external heat could trigger the cascade failure I'd been predicting for months. I spent Sunday night at the facility officially conducting routine maintenance while actually installing independent monitoring equipment that would document system failures in real time. If Marcus wanted to destroy evidence of our infrastructure problems, he would have to do it while I created irrefutable proof of his negligence. The primary chillers were cycling every 11 minutes instead of their normal 23-minute intervals. Coolant pressure had dropped to 87% of recommended levels. Most concerning the backup generators showed battery degradation that meant they could only sustain emergency power for 42 minutes instead of the 4 hours required by our client contracts. At 2 a.m, while reviewing system logs, I discovered something that made me physically sick. Marcus had installed remote access software that allowed him to control our cooling systems from his home computer. The software included override capabilities that could disable safety shutdowns, meaning he could trigger a controlled failure that would appear to be caused by extreme weather rather than deliberate sabotage. He wasn't just planning to let our systems fail naturally. He was preparing to trigger a disaster that would destroy evidence of his fraud while collecting massive insurance payouts. I photographed everything, copied files to multiple secure locations, and sent encrypted summaries to Patricia with instructions to distribute them to federal investigators if anything happened to me. Monday morning arrived with record-breaking heat and news that made my blood freeze. Marcus had called an all-hands meeting to announce that TechFlow's IPO had been moved up by 6 weeks due to favorable market conditions. The accelerated timeline meant they needed to present quarterly financial reports showing exceptional performance and minimal infrastructure expenses. "This is an exciting time for our company," Marcus told the assembled staff. "We're positioned to become one of the fastest-growing data management firms in the country. Everyone's hard work and dedication has brought us to this moment." Jake stood beside him, nodding enthusiastically as Marcus outlined expansion plans and profit projections that assumed zero infrastructure maintenance costs for the next 18 months. "Some of you may have heard concerns about our facility operations," Marcus continued, his eyes finding mine across the crowded conference room. "I want to assure everyone that our systems are operating perfectly, and any suggestions to the contrary are simply misunderstandings of normal operational fluctuations." The dismissal was public and absolute. He was telling the entire company that I was wrong, paranoid, and potentially disloyal for questioning TechFlow's infrastructure. But as Marcus spoke about the company's bright future, I was watching real-time temperature readings on my hidden monitoring equipment. Server Section B had reached 91 degrees. The primary coolant circulation pump was showing pressure fluctuations that indicated imminent mechanical failure, and the backup chillers were running at full capacity during morning hours when they should barely be functioning. We had maybe 6 hours before catastrophic system failure became inevitable. After the meeting, Marcus cornered me in the hallway. "I hope you've given serious thought to my transfer offer," he said. "Today would be an excellent day to start fresh somewhere new." "I'm still considering my options," I replied. "Don't consider too long, Wendy. Sometimes opportunities have expiration dates." But as he walked away, I realized that Marcus had made another critical error in his calculations. He'd assumed I was motivated primarily by money and personal security. He'd never considered that some people value truth more than comfort, and that engineers like me understand that preventing disasters is more important than preventing embarrassment. Patricia found me an hour later, her face pale with urgency. "Federal investigators are mobilizing, but they need 24 hours to coordinate with multiple agencies. Can our systems survive until tomorrow morning?" I looked at the temperature readings climbing toward critical levels and gave her the only honest answer I could. "Not without help." Patricia and I spent Monday evening planning what amounted to a carefully orchestrated counterintelligence operation. We had less than 12 hours before system failure became inevitable, and Marcus's remote access capabilities meant he could trigger the disaster at any moment if he suspected we were exposing his fraud. The federal investigators Patricia contacted included agents from the FBI's Cybercrime Division, Department of Energy Infrastructure Protection Specialists, and Securities and Exchange Commission fraud investigators. Her military security clearance had given her direct access to people who understood the national security implications of TechFlow's government data contracts. "Agent Sarah Campbell from the FBI will arrive at 6 tomorrow morning with search warrants," Patricia explained. "But they need the facility to be in a documented state of emergency to justify immediate action. Otherwise, Marcus's lawyers could delay the investigation for months." "The emergency is already happening," I said, showing her temperature readings that had exceeded safe operating parameters for 8 consecutive hours. "The question is whether we can control the failure enough to preserve evidence while protecting client data." We divided responsibilities based on our expertise. Patricia would secure all financial records, prevent destruction of documents, and coordinate with law enforcement. I would focus on keeping critical systems operational while documenting the technical failures that proved Marcus's negligence. My first priority was bypassing Marcus's remote access software without alerting him to our activities. Using administrative privileges I'd accumulated over 3 years, I created shadow monitoring systems that would track his attempts to manipulate our cooling infrastructure while implementing emergency protocols to prevent catastrophic data loss. The technical challenge was enormous. I needed to maintain enough cooling capacity to protect client information while allowing temperatures to rise sufficiently to trigger the emergency conditions federal agents required. It was like performing surgery while the patient was having a heart attack. I began by redistributing server loads, moving critical government and medical data to our most stable cooling zones while shifting less essential systems to areas where controlled failures would provide dramatic evidence of infrastructure neglect. Every decision required balancing client protection against the need for irrefutable proof of Marcus's crimes. At 11 p.m., my hidden monitoring systems detected Marcus accessing our facility controls from his home computer. I watched in real time as he attempted to disable safety shutdowns on the primary chiller units, the exact manipulation that would cause explosive cooling system failure rather than gradual degradation. But I was ready for him. Using backup administrative access, I prevented his shutdown commands from executing while making it appear that the systems were responding normally to his inputs. From his perspective, the cooling units were following his sabotage instructions. In reality, I was maintaining minimal functionality while documenting every attempt he made to trigger catastrophic failure. The cat-and-mouse game continued until 3 in the morning. Marcus repeatedly tried to force system failures that would destroy evidence while generating insurance claims, and I repeatedly blocked his efforts while preserving records of his criminal intent. Meanwhile, Patricia was busy in other parts of the facility. She'd identified all physical documents related to Marcus's fraud, secured backup copies of financial records, and planted hidden cameras to document any attempts at evidence destruction. Her security expertise proved invaluable in anticipating how Marcus might try to cover his tracks. "He's hired a document shredding service to arrive at 7 tomorrow morning," she reported during one of our brief coordination meetings. Emergency destruction of financial records to reduce clutter before the move to temporary offices during facility renovation. "What renovation?" I asked. "The renovation that doesn't exist. He's planning to claim the cooling system failure was caused by construction work that disrupted normal operations." Marcus's capacity for deception seemed endless, but his overconfidence was becoming his weakness. He was so convinced that he'd silenced all opposition that he wasn't being careful about covering his electronic tracks. I discovered email conversations with Sarah detailing their plan to blame the infrastructure failure on my sabotage of monitoring systems. They'd prepared false testimony claiming I'd modified sensor calibrations out of spite after being passed over for promotion. Jake had created falsified security footage showing me accessing cooling system controls at times when I was actually at home. The frame-up was comprehensive and sophisticated, designed to destroy my credibility while portraying Marcus as the victim of a disgruntled employee's revenge plot. If I hadn't been documenting everything in real time, their version of events might have been convincing enough to send me to prison while they escaped with insurance money and client data. At 4 a.m., I made a discovery that transformed our investigation from corporate fraud into something much more serious. While reviewing Marcus's remote access logs, I found evidence that he'd been secretly copying client data to external servers before triggering system failures. Medical records, financial information, and classified government data were being systematically stolen and sold to competitors and foreign entities. This wasn't just insurance fraud, it was espionage and identity theft on a massive scale. I immediately encrypted copies of the evidence and transmitted them to Patricia, who forwarded everything to Agent Campbell with urgent security flags. The FBI response was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of a small fraud investigation, we now had counterintelligence agents coordinating with Homeland Security officials to address potential national security breaches. The facility is now considered a crime scene with international implications, Patricia told me after speaking with federal coordinators. They're mobilizing resources that I didn't even know existed. As dawn approached and temperatures climbed toward 115 degrees, I faced the final technical challenge of our operation. I needed to maintain enough system stability to preserve evidence while allowing controlled failures dramatic enough to justify federal intervention. The solution required precision timing and flawless execution. I would allow Server Section C to overheat dramatically, triggering every alarm and safety protocol, while maintaining cooling for Sections A and B, where critical data was stored. The visible emergency would provide legal justification for immediate federal action while protecting the information that could send Marcus to prison for the rest of his life. At 5:30 a.m., I initiated the carefully planned sequence of events that would bring Marcus's criminal empire crashing down around him. But as emergency alarms began blaring throughout the facility, I discovered that Marcus had one final surprise waiting for me. The piercing wail of temperature alarms filled the facility as Server Section C reached 98 degrees and climbing. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red, while automated systems began shutting down non-critical operations to prevent total infrastructure collapse. This was the controlled crisis I'd engineered, but the sound still made my heart race with genuine fear. Marcus arrived at the facility 40 minutes later, his face a mask of concern and confusion that would have been convincing if I hadn't spent the night documenting his attempts at sabotage. "What's happening, Wendy?" he asked, surveying the chaos of emergency response crews and overheating equipment. "Exactly what I've been warning you about for 6 months," I replied, holding up a tablet showing real-time temperature readings from my independent monitoring systems. "This is impossible. Jake assured me that all our cooling systems were functioning perfectly." His performance was flawless. The shocked CEO discovering that his trusted facility manager had been lying about critical safety issues. If I hadn't known better, I might have felt sorry for him. Jake appeared 20 minutes later looking genuinely panicked as he realized the scope of the emergency. Unlike Marcus, Jake's distress was real because he understood that their cost-cutting measures had finally caught up with them. "The backup chillers aren't responding," Jake reported, "and the primary cooling system is running at maximum capacity but can't keep up with external temperatures." "Have you contacted our insurance company?" Marcus asked. "They're sending investigators immediately. This kind of equipment failure could trigger policies worth millions of dollars." I watched this conversation with fascination, knowing that Marcus was already calculating how to turn the disaster into profit, while Jake worried about the technical realities of keeping servers from melting completely. But neither of them noticed Patricia coordinating with federal agents who were taking positions around the facility. Agent Sarah Campbell arrived at exactly 6 a.m. with a team of 12 investigators and enough legal documentation to seize every piece of equipment in the building. She was a tall, serious woman with 20 years of experience investigating corporate fraud and cybercrime. "Dr. Marcus Sterling, you're under arrest for federal fraud conspiracy and violations of national security protocols," she announced, producing handcuffs as Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to terror. "This is outrageous," Marcus protested. "Our facility is experiencing a natural disaster caused by extreme weather. You can't arrest me for equipment failures." "We're arresting you for deliberately causing those failures while defrauding insurance companies and federal agencies," Agent Campbell replied. "We have comprehensive documentation of your activities, including remote access logs showing your attempts to sabotage cooling systems." Jake tried to run. He made it exactly 37 steps toward the parking lot before 2 federal agents tackled him to the asphalt. The laptop he'd been carrying contained evidence of the falsified maintenance records, fraudulent part purchases, and correspondence with contractors who'd helped conceal infrastructure failures. "I want a lawyer," Jake gasped from underneath Agent Rodriguez. "You'll need several," Rodriguez replied. "Federal fraud conspiracy and accessory to espionage charges carry different legal requirements." Sarah Chen lasted slightly longer before breaking down completely. When agents presented her with evidence of the diverted infrastructure funds, falsified quarterly reports, and conspiracy to defraud federal agencies, she immediately offered to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt," she sobbed in the facility's conference room while investigators recorded her statement. "Marcus convinced me that the risks were manageable and that addressing them would destroy the company's IPO prospects." "So you chose to hide critical safety information from federal regulators?" Agent Campbell asked. "We thought we could resolve the problems after going public. The infrastructure issues were supposed to be temporary. And the stolen client data, was that also temporary?" Sarah's face went white. "What stolen data?" Agent Campbell showed her evidence of Marcus's data theft operation. Terabytes of medical records, financial information, and classified government files copied to external servers and sold to competitors. "I didn't know about any of that," Sarah whispered. "Marcus never told me he was stealing client information." But her ignorance wouldn't protect her from federal conspiracy charges. While arrests were happening inside the facility, I focused on preventing total system failure that could destroy the evidence federal investigators needed. The temperature in server section C had reached 103 degrees, approaching the critical threshold where permanent equipment damage became inevitable. Using every technique I'd learned over 3 years of maintaining these systems, I rerouted cooling capacity from non-essential areas while implementing emergency protocols to protect client data. It was like battlefield medicine for computer infrastructure, triaging systems to save what could be saved while documenting everything for legal purposes. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now desperately trying to keep functional the same systems I'd been warning were inadequately maintained. But the difference was that I was fighting to protect client information rather than corporate profits. Patricia proved invaluable during the evidence collection process. Her security expertise helped federal agents identify every location where Marcus might have hidden records, and her military training kept her calm while coordinating multiple law enforcement agencies. "They found Marcus's home computer," she reported as investigators worked through the facility. "He was planning to trigger total system failure at noon today after the stock market opened. The timing would have maximized insurance claims while destroying evidence of data theft." "How much client information did he steal?" I asked. "Preliminary estimates suggest over 4 million individual records, including medical files, financial accounts, and classified research data. Some of the information was sold to foreign intelligence services." The scope of Marcus's crimes was staggering. What had started as infrastructure neglect had evolved into one of the largest data theft operations in American history. As federal agents secured the facility, I received the phone call I'd been dreading for months. "This is Dr. Jennifer Martinez from Sacramento General Hospital," the voice on my phone said. "Our patient data servers are showing critical errors, and we can't access medical records for emergency room patients. Is your facility experiencing technical problems?" My worst fears were being realized. The cooling system failure was affecting medical institutions, financial companies, and government agencies that depended on TechFlow's infrastructure. Real people were being hurt because Marcus prioritized personal profit over public safety. "Dr. Martinez, this is a federal emergency situation. Agent Campbell from the FBI will coordinate with your IT department to restore access to critical medical data." "How long until our systems are back online?" "We're working as fast as possible, but it may take several hours to stabilize operations." Hanging up that phone call, I realized that preventing Marcus's fraud wasn't just about justice. It was about protecting vulnerable people who depended on systems they didn't understand and couldn't control. But Agent Campbell had one more revelation that would change everything I thought I knew about Marcus's operation. "Wendy, we need to show you something," she said, approaching me with a tablet displaying financial records I'd never seen before. "These are TechFlow's actual bank accounts. Marcus has been operating a parallel financial structure, diverting client payments into personal accounts while reporting different revenue figures to investors and regulators." The numbers were staggering. Marcus had stolen over $12 million from client payments while claiming the company was struggling financially. The infrastructure problems weren't caused by budget constraints. They were caused by theft. He could have fixed every cooling system problem with money he stole from the people he was supposed to be protecting, I said. "Which is why his federal charges now include racketeering and organized financial crime. He's facing potential life imprisonment." Standing in the midst of the controlled chaos surrounding me, emergency crews working to prevent total system failure, federal agents collecting evidence of massive fraud, and client companies scrambling to protect their data, I finally understood the true scope of what we'd accomplished. We hadn't just stopped a corporate cover-up. We'd exposed a criminal enterprise that threatened national security and public safety. But our work wasn't finished yet. 6 months after that sweltering August morning when TechFlow's house of cards collapsed, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Marcus Sterling learn the consequences of valuing profit over human safety. Judge Patricia Morrison listened impassively as prosecutors detailed Marcus's crimes: 18 counts of federal fraud, conspiracy to commit espionage, violation of national security protocols, and racketeering. The evidence was overwhelming. Thousands of documents, recorded conversations, and digital forensics that painted a picture of corruption spanning 3 years. "Mr. Sterling, your actions endangered millions of Americans and compromised national security for personal financial gain," Judge Morrison said as she delivered the sentence. "This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison and orders restitution of $37 million to affected victims." Marcus aged 10 years in the moment that gavel fell. The confident, charismatic CEO who'd built TechFlow from nothing would spend the rest of his productive life in prison, his reputation destroyed, and his assets seized to compensate the people he'd betrayed. Jake received 5 years for conspiracy and fraud after cooperating with prosecutors. His testimony revealed the full extent of how cost-cutting measures had compromised infrastructure across multiple TechFlow facilities, potentially affecting millions of additional records that investigators were still working to secure. Sarah's cooperation earned her 2 years of probation and community service, but her career in corporate finance was finished. No legitimate company would hire someone who'd participated in federal fraud, regardless of her cooperation with authorities. The criminal proceedings were satisfying, but the real validation came from the industry response to our case. Within 3 months of the arrests, Congress passed the Data Center Infrastructure Safety Act, requiring independent monitoring of critical cooling systems and protecting whistleblowers who report safety violations. The law was informally known as Wendy's Law among engineering professionals, a designation that made me proud and embarrassed in equal measure. I testified before the Senate Technology Subcommittee about the technical failures we'd discovered and the systematic corporate pressure to hide infrastructure problems from clients and regulators. My detailed explanations of cooling system maintenance, temperature monitoring, and backup power requirements became part of federal regulations that would protect millions of people from similar fraud. Ms. Thompson, your willingness to stand up for technical integrity, despite enormous personal and professional pressure, may have prevented one of the largest data security disasters in American history, Senator Elizabeth Warren said during my testimony. You represent the best traditions of American engineering and public service. The recognition was gratifying, but the personal rewards meant even more. The Federal Whistleblower Protection Program awarded me $800,000 for exposing Marcus's crimes money that eliminated my family's financial stress and opened opportunities I'd never imagined possible. My mother's diabetes treatment was now fully covered by health insurance I could afford, including the continuous glucose monitoring system that had previously been financially out of reach. Her blood sugar levels stabilized, her energy returned, and she was able to resume the active lifestyle she'd enjoyed before her diagnosis. Tommy graduated from UCLA with highest honors and immediately received job offers from Google, Apple, and Microsoft. More importantly, he'd learned about integrity and courage from watching his sister fight for what was right, despite overwhelming opposition. You showed me that being smart isn't enough, he said during his graduation celebration. You have to be willing to use your intelligence to protect people even when it's hard. The professional recognition opened doors I'd never expected. Google offered me a position as Director of Infrastructure Safety responsible for developing cooling system standards for their global data center network. Amazon Web Services wanted me to lead their climate resilience program. Tesla approached me about managing power systems for their expanding charging network infrastructure. But the opportunity that excited me most came from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the emergency room physician whose hospital had been affected by TechFlow's system failure, contacted me about a collaboration between Stanford Medical School and the Department of Energy to develop ultra-reliable data systems for medical facilities. Patient care depends on information technology that most doctors don't understand, she explained during our meeting. We need engineers who prioritize human safety over profit margins, people who understand that technical decisions have real-world consequences for vulnerable populations. The Stanford position offered everything I dreamed of: cutting-edge technical challenges, unlimited research funding, and the opportunity to develop infrastructure standards that would protect people rather than profit shareholders. I accepted immediately. My personal life underwent equally dramatic transformation. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I met James Patterson at a conference on sustainable data center design. He was an environmental engineer who specialized in renewable energy systems for critical infrastructure, someone who understood both the technical complexity of my work and the ethical responsibility that came with it. James was everything David hadn't been: honest, supportive of my professional ambitions, and committed to using technology for social good rather than personal advancement. When he proposed 11 months later, he did it at the groundbreaking ceremony for the first data center built, according to the new federal safety standards. "I want to marry someone who makes the world safer," he said, kneeling in the middle of a construction site while wearing a hard hat. "Will you help me design a life together?" The most satisfying moment came 14 months after Marcus's conviction, when I stood with Patricia Williams at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Sacramento Data Security Center. The facility incorporated every lesson we'd learned from TechFlow's failures, redundant cooling systems, with independent monitoring, transparent maintenance protocols, and federal oversight of all safety procedures. Patricia had been promoted to Director of Federal Data Center Security, coordinating safety standards across government facilities nationwide. Our partnership during the TechFlow crisis had evolved into a professional collaboration that was improving infrastructure protection throughout the country. You know what I learned from this whole experience? Patricia asked as we watched dignitaries tour the new facility. What's that? Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people nobody notices until something goes wrong. Engineers like you prevent disasters that most people never know were threatening them. And security professionals like you make sure the bad guys can't hide behind corporate structures when they put people at risk. Standing in that gleaming new facility, surrounded by cooling systems that functioned properly and monitoring equipment that provided accurate data, I reflected on the journey that had brought us there. 18 months earlier, I'd been an isolated engineer trying desperately to convince people that critical infrastructure was failing. I'd faced corporate corruption, personal betrayal, and professional sabotage while fighting to protect data belonging to millions of people I'd never meet. The fight had cost me a relationship, threatened my family's financial security, and nearly destroyed my career. But it had also revealed strength I didn't know I possessed and connected me with people who shared my commitment to using technical expertise for human benefit rather than corporate profit. Most importantly, it had taught me that engineering isn't just about understanding how systems work. It's about accepting responsibility for how those systems affect real people's lives. The servers humming around us contained medical records that could save lives, financial data that secured families' futures, and research information that might solve critical problems facing our society. Protecting that information wasn't just a technical challenge. It was a moral obligation that required both expertise and courage. As James and I drove home from the ceremony, I thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by our fight against Marcus's corruption. Medical patients whose treatment hadn't been disrupted because we'd preserved their records. Financial institutions that had avoided catastrophic data loss because we'd exposed the infrastructure problems threatening their operations. Government researchers whose classified work remained secure because we'd stopped the espionage operation that could have compromised national security. Do you ever regret getting involved in all of this? James asked as we stopped at a red light. I considered the question seriously. The past year had been exhausting, stressful, and occasionally frightening. There had been nights when I'd wondered if the personal cost of fighting Marcus was worth the professional vindication. There had been moments when accepting his transfer offer seemed like the smart, practical choice. But looking at the future, we were building together, a life dedicated to developing technology that served human needs rather than corporate greed. I knew I'd made the right choice. I regret that it took so long to expose the truth, I said. I regret that people got hurt before we could stop Marcus. But I don't regret standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. The light turned green, and we continued toward home, toward a future built on the foundation of integrity and courage that had carried us through our darkest moments. 6 months later, I received an invitation that brought everything full circle. The University of California, Davis, my alma mater, asked me to speak at their engineering school commencement ceremony about the relationship between technical expertise and social responsibility. Standing at the podium looking out at 300 graduating engineers, I saw myself 4 years earlier, ambitious, talented, and convinced that technical competence was sufficient for professional success. Engineering isn't just about solving technical problems, I told them. It's about accepting responsibility for how those solutions affect the world around us. You will face moments in your careers when doing the right thing seems impossible, when powerful people pressure you to compromise your principles for financial gain, when standing up for truth threatens everything you've worked to achieve. I paused, thinking about Marcus sitting in federal prison, about the millions of people whose data was now protected by stronger safety standards, about the infrastructure disasters that would never happen because of the regulations we'd fought to implement. In those moments, remember that your knowledge comes with an obligation to use it wisely. Remember that the systems you design and maintain affect real people who depend on your integrity. And remember that sometimes the most important engineering challenge isn't building something new. It's having the courage to speak truth about something that's broken. The graduation ceremony concluded with the traditional engineering oath, but the words carried new meaning after everything I'd experienced. I pledged to use my knowledge and skill for the advancement of human welfare, to be honest and impartial, and to serve with fidelity my profession and my fellow citizens. Walking across campus after the ceremony, I realized that my fight against Marcus had taught me the true meaning of that oath. Engineering excellence without moral courage is meaningless. Technical expertise without social responsibility is dangerous, and sometimes protecting human welfare requires risking everything you've built to stand up for what's right. The servers are humming safely now, monitored by systems that tell the truth about their condition, and maintained by people who understand that profit without integrity is just another form of theft. The data they protect belongs to millions of people who trust engineers like us to choose human safety over corporate greed. That trust is sacred, and defending it is worth any personal cost. Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and protecting what's comfortable? Sometimes standing up for truth feels impossible until you realize that the people depending on your courage don't have any other choice. I'd love to hear about times when you've faced similar decisions, when you've had to risk something important to protect something more important. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moral challenges. Share it with someone who works in technology or anyone who's ever wondered whether one person can really make a difference against powerful interests. Thank you for listening, and remember, integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to do the right thing even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted.